So sometimes in programming, there will be moments where you have to handle errors, and you have to appropriately manage them. In JavaScript, we can use try catch to handle errors. So here I have a simple add strings function that just adds two strings. So let's try it out. Hello world. Now, to be fair, it's not all that useful because you can just do this with the same effect. But it is just an example function. Anyways. Now, what happens when you try to add a number? Now, if you're looking at the actual code, this might give you away, but it throws an error. What about, I don't know, two numbers? Another error. What about string here? Another error. What about we have two numbers in the form of string? Then it works. So let me explain what it does. The function checks. First, it tries to run it, the main business logic or like the main function of the code, right? It checks, okay, is string one a string? Okay, because obviously it can be a number. And this goes into types in JavaScript, which even though JavaScript isn't a strongly typed language, it still does support types. So a type is like literally what does a value represent? For example, this is a variable, constant variable, with a value of 1. Now the type of this is int, or a number. Now technically there's a lot of number types, but that's besides the point. It's an integer. This, I think it's a float, and then you could get into some complex decimals, but just think of it as a number type. What is this? Well, a string, it just represents words, letters, sentences, stuff like that. Or just anything between like two quotes. You can even have numbers, and this is still a string because it's in these two quotes. Then you can have, of course, booleans, which represent true or false. So yeah, that's kind of what types are. They just represent what a value represents. So it checks, okay, is string 1 actually a string? It's making sure that it's not a number or something like that. And it does the same thing with string 2. If both of these are true, it will return string 1 plus string 2. Now, if at least one of these is false, it'll throw an error. So basically, it'll force an error in the program, which is then caught right here. So it catches error. Then this console.error is kind of the same thing as console.log, which is specifically for errors. Then it'll console log the error that the mistake ran into. Or mistake, I mean program, sorry. Now, for this function, you could have gone about checking fill a string in different ways. However, if you wanted to do something like API, sometimes an API just won't even return, and you need to handle the error there. When you're managing files, you need to handle the errors there, and when you're managing all these different things that potentially could have errors that isn't due to the programmer's fault, you need to check, okay, where could there be possibly errors? How do I handle that? Then, yeah. Now, there's also this finally keyword. And this is not really applicable for this specific function. But what it does is tries the main logic of the code, catches an error if there is one, and then finally, if there is an error, you can do some safety stuff. So like, if you were managing an API, you would try to get the message from the API, catch any errors if there was any. And then finally, I guess, set the API value to null. So then you can fix that on the front end. So we can do console.log. I don't know. Please read docs or something. Here it's not really the most applicable, but yeah, this is more for just ensuring their program's safe, even if there is any errors. So yeah, that's the basics of error handling in JavaScript. You know, the try catch block. Yeah, that's pretty much how you're gonna do it. You try to run the main logic of a program. If there's an error, you know, debug that in some way. The easiest way is using console.error. Then if you want, you do not have to have this. This is kind of overkill for most scenarios. You can have this finally block to clean up any, I guess, mistakes, like the error cause. So yeah, like this video if you want, subscribe if you want, like if you want. Boom. Goodbye.